Okay, so I know I shouldn't have done it, but sometimes you just get tired of being the good kid, you know? It all started on a Friday night. My parents were out of town, and my older brother was supposed to be watching me. Except by watching me, he meant locking himself in his room with his girlfriend. So naturally I thought, why not take advantage of this rare opportunity? My best friend Layla texted me earlier that day about this party happening in some sketchy neighborhood. She called it a little shady, but said the guy hosting it was low-key hot. Classic Layla. She lives for the chaos. I didn't know much about the guy except his name was Brandon, and he was older, like 19 or 20. Layla promised it was going to be epic and that we had to go. Against my better judgment, I threw on some ripped jeans and my favorite crop top, and around 10 p.m. Layla rolled up in her beat-up Honda. She honked once, loud enough to shake the whole street. I almost bailed right then, but I didn't want her calling me a chicken. So I grabbed my bag, yelled something about going to bed early in case my brother actually cared, and snuck out. When we got to the house, it was already sketchy vibes. Like the kind of house that you'd swear was straight out of a true crime doc. It was this beat-up, single-story thing with a busted porch light and a sagging roof. Cars were packed up and down the block, and the bass from the music inside was so loud it made my chest vibrate. Layla, of course, was already hyped. "This is gonna be lit," she said, dragging me toward the door. I wasn't feeling it, though. Something about the energy was just off. There were these random guys standing in the front yard, passing a blunt around and giving us a once-over like they were sizing us up. One of them, this tall dude with neck tattoos, smirked and said, "You girls better behave in there." I forced a laugh, but my stomach was doing flips. Inside, it was chaos. The smell of smoke and cheap beer hit me like a wall, and there were way too many people crammed into this tiny space. The living room was basically a makeshift dance floor, and someone had cleared the furniture to the edges of the room. A group of guys was playing beer pong in the kitchen, and every now and then, you'd hear someone shouting over the music. Brandon, the host, was easy to spot. He had this cocky vibe, a gold chain, and a backwards hat. Layla wasted no time cozying up to him, leaving me to fend for myself. I grabbed a solo cup and stuck to the edges of the room, trying to look like I wasn't awkwardly third-wheeling my own life. That's when things started getting weird. First, I noticed this one car parked outside. It was this beat-up black Honda that kept driving by real slow. At first, I thought it was just someone looking for a spot, but they circled the block again and again. I pointed it out to Layla, but she just shrugged it off. "Probably someone's ride," she said, waving me off like I was overreacting. Then there was the argument. Two guys started shouting at each other in the kitchen. I didn't catch what it was about, something about money or a girl, I think. Everyone stopped for a second to watch, but Brandon stepped in and broke it up pretty quickly. Still, the tension didn't go away. One of the guys stormed out, slamming the door so hard it made the whole house shake. By now, I was ready to leave. The vibes were getting worse by the minute, but Layla was too busy flirting with Brandon to care. I tried to convince her to go, but she just rolled her eyes. "You're being so dramatic," she said, laughing. "Chill out, have another drink." I didn't. Something about that car, the argument, the whole night, it just didn't sit right with me. So I decided to bounce. I told Layla I wasn't feeling well, and that I'd Uber home. She barely even noticed I was leaving. I stepped outside, and it was eerily quiet compared to the chaos inside. That black Honda was parked down the street, engine idling. My heart was pounding, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. I started walking toward the corner, trying to put some distance between me and the house. That's when it happened. I heard the screech of tires first. The black Honda sped up, and before I could even process what was going on, I saw the windows roll down. Then came the gunshots. Rapid, deafening pops that shattered the night. I froze. It felt like time stopped, like my body couldn't figure out whether to run or drop to the ground. I saw two guys in the car, both masked, leaning out the windows with guns in their hands. They weren't aiming at me, they were aiming at the house. I don't even remember hitting the ground, but somehow I ended up behind a parked car, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. The shots kept coming, and then just as quickly as it started, it stopped. The car sped off, tires screeching again, leaving this eerie silence in its wake. When I finally looked up, the house was chaos again, but this time for all the wrong reasons. People were screaming, running out the door, some of them covered in blood. I saw a girl I'd been standing next to earlier collapse on the porch, her friends trying to stop the bleeding. Someone else was lying in the yard, not moving at all. I don't know how long I stayed there, crouched behind that car, before my legs finally worked again. I ran. I didn't stop until I was halfway down the block. And even then, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting that car to come back. When I got home, I locked every door and window, then sat on my bed shaking for hours. My phone was blowing up with texts from Layla, who somehow managed to avoid getting hurt. 2 people died that night, a girl and one of the guys from the argument. I still don't know what exactly happened, if it was gang-related or just some random beef that escalated. All I know is that I wasn't supposed to be there, and if I hadn't left when I did, well, I might not be here to tell you this. Needless to say, I've never snuck out again. I've always loved camping. There's something liberating about being completely alone in nature, surrounded by towering trees and the kind of silence you only find deep in the woods. Last summer, I decided to take a solo camping trip to a national forest in Oregon. It seemed like the perfect getaway from the noise and chaos of daily life. The first day went off without a hitch. I set up my tent in a clearing with a great view of the nearby lake, spent the afternoon fishing, and cooked a modest dinner over my small campfire. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest transformed. The vibrant greens turned to shadowy blues and blacks, and the soft hum of daytime creatures was replaced by the distant calls of owls and the rustle of leaves. I went to bed that night feeling completely at peace, nestled in my sleeping bag with the cool night air filling the tent. But that peace was short-lived. When I woke up the next morning, something felt off. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it. The air seemed colder, heavier. It wasn't until I stepped out of the tent that I noticed it. My food bag was gone. I had hung it on a branch the night before, out of reach of scavenging animals. But now the rope dangled empty, swaying slightly in the breeze. My first thought was bears, but I hadn't heard anything during the night, and there weren't any claw marks or other signs of an animal attack. The knot on the rope hadn't been chewed. It had been untied. That realization sent a chill down my spine. Trying to shake it off, I spent the morning searching the area for any sign of my food bag. I didn't find it, but I did find something else. Footprints. Human footprints. They were faint but unmistakable. Pressed into the soft dirt near my campsite, they circled the area, weaving between the trees, and stopped just a few feet from my tent. Someone had been here. The rest of the day was a blur. I packed up my remaining supplies and considered heading back to my car, but it was a 2-day hike out of the forest, and I didn't want to risk getting caught in the dark halfway there. I convinced myself that whoever had been snooping around was long gone. Maybe they'd just been curious or lost. As night fell, I built another fire, hoping the light would make me feel safer. But the forest seemed darker than before, the shadows deeper and more oppressive. Every sound made my heart race. The crack of a twig, the rustle of leaves, even the wind seemed sinister. Then I heard it. Footsteps. They were faint at first, almost drowned out by the crackling fire, but they grew louder, closer. I froze, straining to hear over the pounding of my heart. The footsteps stopped just beyond the firelight. I couldn't see anything past the dancing shadows, but I knew someone was there. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is someone there?" Silence. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire with my flashlight in one hand and a makeshift weapon of thick branch in the other. Every so often, I thought I heard movement in the trees, but I couldn't be sure if it was real or my imagination. When the sun finally rose, I felt a small wave of relief. I decided to pack up and leave, even if it meant a grueling hike back to the car without much food. As I took down my tent, I noticed something that stopped me cold. A small folded piece of paper was wedged under a rock near the fire pit. My hands trembled as I picked it up and unfolded it. In messy, scrawled handwriting, it read, "Nice night for a campfire." My blood ran cold. I didn't waste any more time. I threw everything into my pack and started down the trail at a brisk pace, constantly glancing over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched was unbearable, but I didn't see anyone. About an hour into my hike, I spotted something ahead that made my stomach drop. A figure stood in the middle of the trail, facing away from me. They were wearing a dark hoodie, the hood pulled up over their head. I ducked behind a tree, my heart hammering in my chest. How had they gotten ahead of me? I hadn't seen or heard anyone on the trail. I waited, barely breathing, until the figure finally moved, stepping off the trail and disappearing into the trees. I stayed hidden for a long time, listening for any sign of them, but the forest was eerily quiet. When I finally worked up the courage to continue, I left the trail entirely, cutting through the woods in an attempt to throw off anyone who might be following me. It was slower and more exhausting, but I felt safer knowing I wasn't sticking to the obvious route. By late afternoon, I was nearing the parking lot where my car was parked. Relief washed over me as I spotted the glint of sunlight reflecting off metal through the trees. I quickened my pace, practically running the last stretch. But just as I reached the edge of the lot, I froze. The same figure from the trail was standing next to my car. They didn't move or look in my direction, but I could tell they were waiting for me. I ducked behind a tree, my mind racing. I couldn't run back into the forest, it would be dark soon, and I didn't want to risk getting lost. But I couldn't just walk up to my car either. I waited, watching the figure from a distance. After what felt like an eternity, they finally walked away, disappearing into the woods on the other side of the lot. I didn't waste any time. I sprinted to my car, fumbling with my keys before finally unlocking the door and throwing myself inside. As I started the engine, I caught one last glimpse of the figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. I didn't look back as I drove away. To this day, I have no idea who that person was or what they wanted. I reported the incident to the park rangers, but they didn't find anything unusual. I still love camping, but I haven't gone on another solo trip since that day. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't noticed the footprints or if I hadn't made it back to my car in time. One thing's for sure, I'll never forget the feeling of being watched in those dark, silent woods. I've always loved the ocean. Growing up in Florida, it's impossible not to. The salty breeze, the endless horizon, and the way the water sparkles under the sun. It feels alive, like it has secrets to share if you're willing to listen. So when my friend Kyle suggested a weekend boating trip with a few of our close friends, I jumped at the chance. Little did I know, that trip would leave me terrified of the ocean forever. It was a Saturday morning, and the weather was perfect. The forecast predicted sunny skies and calm waters, so we packed light, sunscreen, a cooler full of drinks, and some fishing gear. There were 5 of us: Kyle, his girlfriend Emily, our friends Jake and Sarah, and me. Kyle had recently bought a modest little motorboat, and he was eager to show it off. We set out from a marina near Clearwater around 9 a.m., the sun already warm on our backs. The waves were gentle, and laughter echoed as we sped across the water. By noon, we were miles off the coast, far enough that the shoreline was a faint smudge on the horizon. We anchored the boat and spent hours fishing, swimming, and basking in the sun. Around 3 p.m., the wind started to pick up. At first, it was a welcome relief from the heat, but within minutes, it became clear something wasn't right. The once blue sky began to darken, clouds rolling in like an ominous curtain. Emily checked her phone for a weather update, but there was no signal this far out. "We should head back," Kyle said, his voice tinged with unease. We scrambled to pull up the anchor, but the wind had already turned into a howl, and the waves were growing restless. As Kyle tried to steer us back toward shore, the first drops of rain splattered on the deck. Within moments, it was a downpour. The storm came on so fast it felt like a nightmare. The boat pitched violently as the waves grew taller, crashing against us with terrifying force. The motor sputtered as water sprayed into it, and Kyle fought to keep control. "I can't see a thing," he shouted over the roar of the wind. The rest of us clung to whatever we could, our knuckles white. Sarah was crying, and Jake was trying to reassure her, though his voice trembled. I gripped the side of the boat, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. And then it happened, the wave that changed everything. A towering wall of water loomed above us, and in that split second, I knew we weren't going to make it. The wave crashed down with a deafening roar, flipping the boat like it was a toy. I was thrown into the water, the cold shock stealing the air from my lungs. When I surfaced, gasping and coughing, the boat was gone. All I could see were pieces of wreckage bobbing in the angry sea. The rain was blinding, and the wind made it impossible to stay steady. I screamed for my friends, but the storm swallowed my voice. Panic set in as I realized I was alone. The waves were relentless, pulling me under and tossing me around like a rag doll. My arms ached as I clung to a piece of the boat's hull, my only lifeline in the chaos. Time lost all meaning as I fought to stay afloat, the freezing water sapping my strength. At some point, the storm began to ease. The rain lessened, and the wind died down, but the waves were still fierce. I squinted into the fading light, desperately searching for any sign of my friends. My throat was raw from screaming their names, and my body was trembling uncontrollably. The hours that followed were a blur of fear and pain. The sun set, and darkness enveloped me, making the vast ocean even more terrifying. The cold was unbearable, and I knew hypothermia was setting in. My fingers were so numb I could barely keep my grip on the wreckage. I thought about my family, about how I might never see them again. I thought about my friends and prayed they were safe, though deep down I feared the worst. Tears mixed with the salt water on my face as I begged the universe for a miracle. Finally, just as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, I heard it, a faint hum that grew louder. I turned my head, barely able to lift it, and saw a rescue boat cutting through the waves. Relief flooded through me, but I didn't have the strength to cry out. They must have seen me because the boat changed course, heading straight for me. Strong arms pulled me from the water, wrapping me in a blanket as I shivered uncontrollably. The rescuers asked me questions, but I could barely respond. All I could do was cling to the fact that I was alive. Later, I learned that Kyle and Emily had also been rescued, though they were miles away from where I was found. Jake and Sarah, however, were never recovered. The guilt of surviving when they didn't still haunts me to this day. I haven't been back to the ocean since. The thought of it makes my chest tighten, and I can't even look at it without feeling sick. People say the ocean is beautiful, but I know the truth. It's powerful, unpredictable, and unforgiving. And it's a reminder that no matter how much we think we're in control, nature always has the final say. I had a paper due the next morning, and of course, I hadn't started. Typical me, procrastinating like my life depended on it. I was at my friend Sasha's apartment in downtown Chicago, and after hours of trying to convince myself I'd finish at her place, I gave up. I needed to go home. It was late, around 11:30 p.m., and my place wasn't far, but the thought of walking alone freaked me out. Chicago streets weren't exactly comforting at night, even with the city's buzz. Sasha offered to let me crash on her couch, but I insisted I'd be fine. "It's just a quick rideshare," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I booked one through the app, watching the little car icon inch closer on the screen. 5 minutes away. 4. 3. When the driver arrived, I double-checked the license plate against the app. It matched, and the driver, a man in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, rolled down the window with a polite smile. "Emily?" he asked. "Yep, that's me," I replied, opening the back door. The interior smelled faintly of air freshener, but there was an odd, lingering scent underneath. I couldn't place it. Something sour, maybe? The seats were worn, the leather cracked and peeling, but I didn't think much of it. Rideshares weren't exactly luxury transportation. We started off toward my place, and I tried to focus on my phone, scrolling through Instagram to avoid small talk. But the driver spoke up almost immediately. "Late night, huh? You coming from a party?" I looked up, startled by the question. His tone was casual, but something about the way he glanced at me in the rearview mirror made my skin crawl. "No, just a friend's place, working on a paper." He nodded, his eyes flicking back to the road. "You a student? What do you study?" English," I said, my voice clipped. I didn't want to be rude, but I also didn't feel like sharing my life story. "English, huh? Bet you're good at writing." "Yeah, I guess," I mumbled, pretending to be engrossed in my phone. The first wrong turn came about 10 minutes in. I noticed it immediately. I think you were supposed to take a left back there," I said, leaning forward slightly. The driver didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm, too calm. "This way's faster, less traffic." I glanced at the app, and sure enough, we were off course. "I don't think so. The app says..." "The app doesn't know everything," he interrupted, his voice sharper now. I froze. My heart started to race, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe he really did know shortcut. Maybe I was overreacting. But then he started asking more questions. "You live alone?" My stomach dropped. "What?" "Your apartment. Do you live alone or you got roommates?" "Why do you need to know that?" I snapped, my voice shaking slightly. He laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that put you at ease. "Just making conversation. You seem nervous." I didn't respond. Instead, I texted Sasha. "Something's off with my driver. He's taking weird routes and asking weird questions. If I send you my location, can you track me?" She replied instantly. "OMG, are you okay?" "Yes, send it to me now." I shared my location and tried to keep my breathing steady. The driver made another wrong turn, this one leading onto a dimly lit road I didn't recognize. My apartment was in the opposite direction. "Where are we going?" I demanded, my voice louder now. "I told you, this way's faster," he said. But his tone had changed. It was colder, detached. I reached for the door handle, testing it subtly. My heart sank when I realized the child locks were on. Panic surged through me. "Let me out, right now." He didn't respond. Instead, he pressed a button, and I heard the soft click of the doors locking. I felt like I was going to throw up. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip my phone. I texted Sasha again. "He locked the doors. I think he's trying to take me somewhere. Call the police." Her reply came seconds later. "On it." Stay calm, but staying calm was impossible. I had to think, fast. The car slowed as we approached a deserted industrial area, the kind of place where no one would hear you scream. I acted on instinct. "I need to throw up," I blurted out. The driver glanced at me in the mirror, his expression unreadable. "What?" "Pull over. I'm gonna be sick," I said, clutching my stomach for effect. He hesitated, but then muttered something under his breath and pulled to the side of the road. The moment the car stopped, I unlocked my seatbelt and slammed my shoulder into the door. It didn't budge. "Nice try," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. But I wasn't done. I reached for my phone and smashed it against the window, the glass cracking but not shattering. The noise startled him enough that he reached back, trying to grab my arm. That's when I kicked him, hard, right in the face. He yelled in pain, and I took the opportunity to unlock the front passenger door from his controls. I scrambled out, running as fast as I could toward the nearest streetlight. Behind me, I heard the car door open and his footsteps pounding against the pavement. My lungs burned as I screamed at the top of my lungs, hoping someone, anyone, would hear me. Just as he was closing the distance, a pair of headlights appeared, and a car slowed down. The driver, a middle-aged woman, rolled down her window. "Are you okay?" she shouted. "He's trying to kidnap me," I screamed, pointing behind me. The woman didn't hesitate. She threw her car into park and got out, brandishing what looked like a tire iron. The man stopped in his tracks, glaring at me before turning and bolting back to his car. The police arrived within minutes, thanks to Sasha's call. They arrested him a few blocks away, and I later found out he had a long history of violent crimes, including assault. I couldn't sleep for days after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face in the rearview mirror. It was a nightmare I wouldn't wish on anyone, but I was alive. And I'll never take a rideshare without triple-checking everything again.